So my first question to both of you, and we'll just go in this order. Can you tell everybody what your first job was, and how did that lead you to become the greatness you are now?
This is funny. Just when everybody raised their hand, I was one of the ones that raised my hand and said, at 12 years old, I knew I wanted to be an electrical engineer. I don't know what I was thinking, but that's what I wanted to do. My first job had nothing to do with it. I actually worked prep team and cashier at Wendy's that used to be on 53rd Street in Hyde Park. That was my very first job.
So Wendy's can lead you to greatness. Did you hear that? Wendy's.
My first engineering job was as an intern, and I worked at Xerox doing, I think at the time it was power on the site. And it was actually pretty exciting because I got to drive around in a golf cart when nobody was at work, so I could do 30 miles an hour through the manufacturing plant, but also to see the different capacitors and see how huge they are and how much, if I don't do it right or shut it off the right way, I could actually get electrocuted. Was kind of cool. But that was my first job.
I love it. I love it.
Thank you. So my first job, so I find this to be a complicated question because I worked for my dad my dad is an engineer. He's a civil engineer, and he started his own business 45 years ago. And so I used to work for him when I was like 6, 7, and 8 years old. I'd go to work with him on Saturdays. And I still remember, my dad laughs about this. He asked me to fill out an employment application. And I was like, what? I'm your daughter. Like, I can't believe you're making me fill this out. So he still has it, like my 7-year-old handwriting filling out this employment application. And he paid me $5 a day, which I thought was awesome. And one of his friends comes in who's an engineer, and he goes, so how much do you get paid? And I was like, $5. I was all proud. And he goes, you know, there's something called minimum wage. And I was like, what is that? And he explains I went, Dad, you have to pay me minimum wage. And my dad looks at his friends like, what are you doing to me? So that was my first lesson in negotiating with a trusted partner, nonetheless. But I think, going to like sort of in my adulthood, I think probably my first external experience working was for the Clinton campaign in 1991. I volunteered on the Clinton campaign over the summer, and it was I worked very long days and long nights, but it was not at all obviously related to engineering. But you know, you kind of get there at 7 and work till as late as until my dad picked me up, and I went home, but it was often 7 or 8 at night. And I kind of so my first couple of jobs were more related to non-engineering things. And, and then I interned in the White House was my next major job. And I interned in the Chief of Staff's office. But the thing that was interesting, I was in school, I was at Northwestern, and then I left the Chief of Staff's office to go to MIT for my master's. And one of the things I realized is, a lot of times people think engineering is this obscure thing that doesn't connect to anything. And what you really find is that what you're doing as an engineer is really foundational. It's the foundation of our infrastructure. It's the foundation of our society. And so it was the first time you really, because it was the first question I get, like, why are you here if you're studying to be an engineer? And I'm like, well, we build communities, we build infrastructure. And it's the different way of thinking that, it's the first time it was sort of proposed to me that maybe engineers don't fit into like the rest of society. And I disagreed.
Interesting. You know what? I want to take this down a level. We're going to call it the Jill level. Because I just read a lot of accolades that both of you have. You guys are engineers, and you talk often on a stage in front of people very abstractly about being an engineer. What do you actually do by day?
Well, right now, what I actually do by day is work full-time with Black women in science and engineering. What did I do? After I graduated, and we were just talking about that in the green room, I didn't actually do design work. And people might find that shocking. the thing was, I realized that I did not want to sit at a desk all day trying to do schematics or, at the time, P-Spice. It just didn't fit me and my personality. What I had a great time doing, and thank goodness someone didn't want me to be a design engineer either, it was worked out, I got the opportunity to go out to suppliers and actually go and find out how they were manufacturing the parts that we were putting into machines. So I saw how thermostats were built and manufactured and used the theory behind it to understand how this product is being developed. Saw boards, bare boards being made. So any gamut you could think of when it comes to electronic sensors, I had the opportunity to actually go to manufacturers and make sure that their parts met the print. So I did use statistics, which is part of our education, and then had great people that I was able to encounter during that time. And I went from quality to actually being a process engineer on the floor, which might have been more industrial engineering. But I realized then, and I found it hard to admit for a moment, that I actually do like support in manufacturing and doing Lean Six Sigma, or working in the warehouse where I was troubleshooting machines that weren't working. So there were still the engineering elements, and then some things about the electrical engineering experience that I learned in school that I was actually working on. But when I went to procurement, then I still kept the quality hat and made sure that whenever we were dealing with our suppliers, that we included the quality in everything we did to try to get productivity and efficiency out of that supplier. So I didn't do design work, but that electrical engineering hat, or that engineering problem solving, and was always theirs. And I actually built connections, like you were saying. And people don't find that engineers necessarily do that, but I did. And it was different working with suppliers than when I went to the other end and dealt with clients. But that experience with clients has helped what Dima was talking about, the network, the collaboration, the things that I've been able to do in this role with very little budget. It's amazing and it's wonderful, and I get to sit here because of the connections I've eventually made.
So when I first graduated from MIT, I took a job working as an engineer for a firm. And I literally designed, so civil engineers, so my background is civil engineering. And civil engineering pretty much is everything, okay? I think that it's sort of the, at MIT it's called Course One. It's the first engineering. And it's really, I think, foundational. I think anything that they don't know what's going on with it starts in civil engineering and then it goes somewhere else. So like we had civil engineering at MIT was it was environmental engineering, it was transportation engineering, it was structural engineering, which was my specialty, roadway engineering. But we also had information technology in civil engineering, which is pretty awesome. So now it's not in civil engineering anymore. It's part of EECS, electrical engineering and computer science. So we had a little bit of everything. And the reason I ended up in civil engineering is because my dad's a civil engineer and I was good at math and science. And I said, so what do you do? He goes, you become a civil engineer. Had I known that you could have been other engineers, I probably would have gone down maybe some other engineering path. But the nice thing about it, so after I graduated, I took a job literally designing beams and buildings and roads. And I had a friend, he would ask me, like, what are you doing today? Like, what does it mean? I was like, today I'm designing beams. I'm literally designing beams for buildings. And the next day I was like, so what are you doing today? I'm like, columns and floors. And then I'd kind of go back through the whole thing. And he was like, so basically you design beam columns and floors? I was like, pretty much, it's the simplest way of saying it. So I did that for like the bulk of my, working for a couple of companies. And I went to work for my dad for about a year, and I did mostly negotiation and communication. We were building a power project in India, so I helped negotiate this power project and connect with the engineering company we hired from India and the Japanese financiers. So it was that, and then I realized nothing could be as hard as working for your dad, so I started my own company. figuring that maybe, worst case scenario, I'll work for somebody else. And in that regard, we really started to say the premise of it was there's a way, people didn't know at that time in 1998 how to integrate technology into your daily infrastructure. So that's what we did. So I did a lot of problem solving and connecting. Like, how can we integrate technology into the solutions that we're providing on an infrastructure basis? And how can we translate those into the sort of the traditional engineering model? And that's where we sort of stayed. So now these days, I don't necessarily do a lot of engineering, although my background really helps me, because if we have a situation, and it's funny, like the stuff that I get into, somebody comes to me and it's like, this guy won't give me a motorized gate valve. And I'm like, okay, why won't we give you a motorized gate valve? Well, it's a violation of the code. And we're like, okay, why don't we marry this and come up with solutions? So sometimes those are the things, but you have to be able to be comfortable enough to navigate it. But the important thing is, whatever type of engineering you have the skill set to understand it all, because foundationally it's there.
Right.
And the funny thing is, I was good in math and science, and I was told to be an electrical engineer.
Yeah.
And you were told to be civil, so that's funny.
Yeah.
Very funny.
Yeah.
So funny.
Saying it from the point of view that,
I am not an engineer.
No, I'm saying it from the point of view from teachers and counselors, right?
Yeah.
So if you're good in math and science, they direct you in a path that they're not quite sure of themselves. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But they see you have an aptitude and they think engineering, maybe not other areas of STEM. And then her father told her civil, and that's the example she had. And I guess at the time, with computers taking off even more, I was told to do electrical. That's why I say it's funny. It's the navigation of STEM.
I'm not an engineer. That's why it's so funny. Because it's me. I have a question that's different for each of you. I didn't come up with these, but somebody wanted to know from you, Leslie, what was and is the biggest challenge you faced in your career? How did you overcome it, if you did?
In my career, there's always some challenges. I could start even a little before that and go to college. College was not easy. I went downstate, and at the time, the school was ranked number 1, 2, then I think it went to number 1 in electrical engineering. It wasn't a very supportive environment. It was all about the numbers, and the competitiveness helped with funding for the school. And while I was there, I wasn't doing as well as I should have been doing. There was one of the deans that mentioned, the dean of the electrical engineering school, which computer engineering was a part of, but it wasn't in the title of the college. And one of the things he said in an auditorium, probably with more people than this, he said, well, I'm sorry I keep talking about electrical engineering, but you know how, and not mentioning computer engineering, but you know how it is, you always have to pick on the minorities. And I'm looking around the room and said, did anybody else catch that? So, that wasn't a very good experience. And then to be told also, as a group collectively, why is it that the black girls that are coming from Chicago public schools in electrical engineering are not doing well? So I was like, okay, getting categorized again. What is it? I don't know. I understood that I knew math and science, and I couldn't imagine a curriculum without it. Reading for me, maybe for some of you, is just great. For me, retention is solving math problems. That's the way I retain the information that's provided to me in all the theories. I eventually transferred schools because I knew I understood the curriculum, I knew I understood the subject matter, and I realized that the school downstate was just a little faster than I needed to go. So I went to a school, and that's where I graduated from Southern University, that was a more supportive environment and wanted me to succeed and to go on and get employed. Because I knew if I stayed at the other school, okay, I could potentially graduate, but who's going to hire me? When I got into Xerox was at the time, their model for recruiting and diversity was pretty stellar. I hadn't heard of another company at the time like that. There were women and minorities in all kind of levels of management, and those people were very supportive of you. They mentored, and then you had people who were in your track that helped there too with mentoring. And then eventually you got sponsorship that you didn't realize that someone was thinking of you to help move you along. But I did have a challenge with a manager who was harassing me in terms of he was the manager, you're going to do what I'm told, and one time he grabbed me. No one saw it. Unfortunately, he was on his way to a meeting with a manager, with the manager's meeting, and everybody was already in that other meeting. And I called my mother and said, Mom, I can't, this can't. And I'm afraid to go to HR because I'm not sure of the connections that he has and what that's going to happen to me now. And my mother told me, because he told other people that he wanted me in his office at 7 o'clock. He told other people. So I got the message. I said, okay. And she told me, when you go in that office, you tell him he harassed you and you're not putting up with it. And I told him exactly that. And he said, oh, well, I don't know what you're saying. He never bothered me again.
Good for you.
So that was definitely one of the most extreme challenges that I had working there. But being a woman, you know that there are some things, the good old boys, you see it. I'm doing all the administrative work. You see it.
Well, thank you for sharing that with us. That's fantastic. Different kind of question for you, Smita. What is the most innovative thing your organization does for its clients or employees?
So it's so the nice thing is they were kind enough to give me this question, and I sat there for like 3 days, like, what are we doing that's innovative? I don't know if we're doing anything innovative. And then it occurred to me, a professor of mine at MIT, I saw last year from a meeting, Professor Connor, who's got to be he graduated from MIT with his PhD in 1945, and he still's on it and great. I love him. But he made this interesting comment to me that as an engineer, if we're not innovating, what are we doing? He goes, we innovate all the time. And I thought it was an interesting comment because it helped me feel a lot better about what am I doing that's really novel and different. I think that, if you ask me sort of the things that I think disrupt us, one of the things we're trying to do, we're really interested in doing, is trying to build on this idea of using drone technology to do physical inspections. I have a couple of young people in the office, and they're totally thrilled about this. So it's kind of cute. I'm very excited. For me, it's really important that the team feels that they're able to contribute and do and bring their expertise to the table to shape the way we're doing things. For me, one of the things I've noticed about our firm is as we hire great talent, and that was a really important premise for my firm, is I felt that as an MIT graduate, I was working for a great company, and I wasn't able to utilize my skill set. And, I'd be like, look, I'd work on something and then go to my boss and say, here, I'm done. And he goes, well, spend 8 more hours on it. And I was like, what am I going to do with 8 more hours? I'm done. And he goes, check it. And I'm like, well, I checked it. And it was just one of those things where you realize there's got to be a way you can use your talent and skill set. So the idea was I wanted to bring on really talented people. And as I hired new people, they always brought something new to bear at the company. And that was really important to me that, I'd go in and they'd say, can we do this? And I'm like, yes, I'll support you. And they were always surprised by that. And they said, what, you're just going to do it because we said? And I said, no, you have a good plan and let's do it. And let's use your skill set to raise the bar of our firm so we're constantly on the cutting edge of things. And I think that's one thing that we've done that I don't know if it's innovative, but it's certainly something that I think is, helps keep us fresh. The other thing that I'm very proud of is, we kind of looked around, for our business, we're kind of always looking. We have to show EEO counts and what is the skill set of the people, where do people come from? And a couple of years ago, we turned around and looked, and we were at over 50% minorities and women. And I was really, thank you. So I was really, and I don't know how it happened. I really tried hard at the beginning, and it was so hard, I just kind of gave up. And then all of a sudden it just happened. And it happened because we were hiring just talented, great people. And it's 50% minorities and women. And to me, that's something that, while we didn't look for it, I'm so honored that we have it. And I'm so glad, and I think it makes the team so much better.
Awesome. Yet another word I keep saying, but it is awesome. I have a couple questions here. Students want to know what advice you guys have for folks who want to become engineers. I want to expand that to anybody in the room who's thinking of a career change, but even more so, and this could be two questions, you can pick what you want to answer. You guys do a lot, and you're in demand a lot. Do you have any tips for anybody else in here who does a lot as to how you manage your time, how you juggle whichever ways you're pulled? How do you do what you do so that you can get it done?
You want to go first?
Sure. So it's actually funny. I don't know how I do it. I don't have, I can tell you that I might be a little bit insane. Maybe that's one of the answers. But my daughter looked at me one day, and she's 6. So I think she told me this about a year ago. She said, I know how you do it. And I said, how do you do it? She goes, one day you're out really late, and the next day you're home with your kids, and the next day you're out really late, and then you were, and it was kind of she recognized my pattern, that I would try and just work like crazy one day, and I'd still go to work during the day, but I'd try and be home and find that balance, because for me that was important. And she goes, and you never work on the weekends. And I was like, okay, that's a good one too. So I managed to sneak those in quietly. But I think that's, for me, I think the only way you can do it is to find your balance. You've got to do what's true to yourself. I think one of the other, Dima, who was speaking earlier, I don't think she's in the room, mentioned that, use the power of yes. And I think I would always put it that I was a no person. I never said no to anybody. So I found myself on literally all these boards and commissions at some point. And then, now, and it's funny, at first I didn't know why, and then, I really started streamlining why I was doing it. For me right now, what's important to me is building communities, making a difference for families and children, seeing the youth of our children continue to expand. And so that also helps because it feels less like work. It feels like something you're doing for a passion and a reason, and then you manage the time. And most importantly, you have to have a great team of people with you, whether it's your husband, your children, your team at your office. I mean, they make the biggest difference, because without all of them, I couldn't do any of it.
I will echo the same thing. I don't have the children or the family at home, but nonetheless, even if you're single and with no children, you still have to find that balance. And you still should not feel as if, because you don't have the children to pick up at 3 o'clock, that you can't make the time for yourself. You have to make time. That's part of why I line dance. But, you have to. And I've been the person that thought, well, some people were allowed to have the flexibility to work at home. Well, and I'm like, why can't I have that same flexibility? I'm feeling kind of left out. I think that women are multifaceted. We do so many different things, and we definitely have to take time for ourselves. So whatever that time is, please make sure that you take it. And as you said, the support, you have to have your support team, no matter who they are, your family, your friends, your colleagues, the ones that you can trust, because there are some that, are not there for you, but you have to discern who are the ones that are there for you, your advocates, your mentors. Have a community inside the office, and please make sure you have one outside the office. If anything was to happen in the office, your outside community and your outside connections and network is what's going to get you through.
Fantastic. I have one more for each of you that's different. These are from engineering students. Do we have students in the room? I don't know where you are, but these are from them. For Leslie, you have worked at Xerox and climbed up the ladder. What do you think was the critical ingredient that helped you do that?
Oh my goodness, sponsorship. It started off, and I had great managers too. When I initially got there, I was supposed to go and work on the manufacturing floor after I did a design assignment. I was in a rotation. And somehow I really upset that plant manager. And I was like, oh my God, now what's going to happen? I had a personnel manager at the time, it was called personnel, who was like, don't worry about it. Don't worry about that job. We'll put you in something else, which wound up being that quality role that I loved. I didn't have to be on the manufacturing floor just getting the product out every day. It was more of a closed environment. You wouldn't hear about what was going on outside. And I actually had some freedom, which was absolutely wonderful. So it started with that HR manager. And then when I did get into the quality group, the managers I had there saw something in me and were there to advocate for me, because in most companies, people do talk about you. You know, there is politics, and people do talk about you in the background and try to determine what is your next role. Who are the high potentials? So you may not know, you'll never know who a sponsor is. You might get lucky and fortunate enough to know who that person is. You will have people that will mentor you, and that's a known relationship. I'm asking you to mentor. But you also have to have those advocates, because there might be people who are not mentoring you but will speak up for you no matter what in any of those closed meetings, because they do happen. So people need to know who you are, the work you can do, and those things. Oh, and also remember that sponsors may switch companies and they may retire. So continue with that. Getting your name out there, your product out there, and tell people what you want, what are your next steps, so that you can move along.
Okay, Smita, has the Me Too movement affected your outlook on working in a male-dominated industry?
That's a really interesting question. I was thinking a little bit about this when Leslie was talking about her experience. And, you know, Leslie had made this comment. I was going to ask Leslie about it at some point. Excuse me. And, you know, sort of, you kind of know this is the good old boy network. And, you know, you kind of, so there's this implication there I felt in your comments, and it's something that I feel the same way too, that it's kind of the way it's been, and not that you have to accept it, but that you learn to navigate it. And I think that's a really, that's probably the way it's been. I mean, as Leslie was talking, I was thinking about, you know, I think my first job, this guy walks up to me and rubbed my arm, and it was really gross and creepy. And he was like, you know, you look so good. And I was like, oh my God. And, you know, you get these, and you get like just you, and, you know, I remember, you know, and they happen recently too. And as my husband said, you know, maybe I've adopted the sheen of being clueless, so I just don't notice it half the time, you know, and so I just kind of walk away from it before it happens. But I think the most interesting thing to me, and I will say, at least in my company and the people I'm communicating with, I think there are a lot of honorable people out there, and there are a lot of honorable men. And from, you know, they help. They help by making sure that the dishonorable men are not being dishonorable. And they're also more aware, because they want, I think, you know, there are a lot that want to do the right thing. So that's where I noticed, especially in my company, we have, you know, the leadership's all women. There was a moment where everyone was very hesitant about approaching and how they were approaching. And so it was kind of an interesting partnership to make everyone comfortable. And especially after, for many years, there were a lot of women who weren't.
Right.
And going back to when I was talking about the Good Old Boys Network, everybody's not in it. Every man is not in the Good Old Boys Network. The manager I was specifically dealing with was, and I needed to understand how to deal with him so that I wasn't politically sabotaging a career that I was really just getting started with.
I'm asking on behalf of all of the parents in the room, how do we get our children to become engineers?
This is an interesting question.
Wendy's.
Right. Because I told you I knew at 12, and it was only because the truth of the matter is I was not good at the traditional roles at the time. I wasn't good at even coloring in between the lines or cutting, so I couldn't see myself doing fashion design or interior decorating or something like that. And I was really good at math and science. And so teachers recognized that, counselors recognized that, and my parents supported it, especially when there was really no role models that I knew of at the time who were doing that. I always say that don't force your children into a STEM career. Please make sure that they have the aptitude for it and the like for it. I know that, a lot of us, when we got started, some of it wasn't always about the like of what we're doing. It was just kind of like, you need a job. And in some cases, you finished whatever degree you were in just so you can get a job. But I would say at this point, please make sure, don't force them because it sounds hot today. Yeah. I know they talk about the pipeline and a 20-year gap. Well, in 20 years, everybody doesn't know exactly what's going to happen. 20 years prior to this, everybody didn't know how the internet was going to take off. The Internet of Things and all these other technologies that are still in development but are here. So please, that's all I would say. Now for engineering, you might want to reach out. There's a lot of different groups, and that's what happened with me. My mother at the time, with non-internet age, found people who were engineers and groups, and she got me plugged into those groups. And admittedly, they were more mechanical. She couldn't find electrical at the time, but at least I could talk to some people in engineering. But now you should be able to, with IEEE or Novashay and all the other groups that exist in terms of engineering groups, it should be easy to get your kids plugged in and talk to them about what they're doing.
Cool. So, I agree with what Leslie said. Don't force your children into it because for me, I think it's really important to find your passion. And, I always say that while I would love for my children to be engineers, I also am more committed to the idea that they're happy and they're working really hard to meet their passion. I would be very disturbed if they're working halfway and making, it's not so much making money, but doing something where they're half-hearted, then they're fully committed. Tony Stark really helps on the engineering thing. My son is committed to going to MIT, yes, because he wants to be Tony Stark, is fairly certain he can become a genius billionaire, which I'm all about. He told me he'd buy me a nice piece of jewelry. I was like, yes. So he's 9, but I think that helps. I think it's really important, though, to talk about careers. And one thing that's right now, and especially these days, everyone's concerned about their careers. Where is the opportunity? And, we have so many different messages going on, but the one thing we know, we need people in science, technology, engineering, and math. We know those careers are out there. We know that if we leave half of our population behind, women and minorities, you're not going to be able to succeed globally. Because I can tell you in India, for me, it was very normal to be an engineer. People expected that. They were totally fine. So you find a lot. I think it's really important for kids to realize there's a career opportunity. I'm desperately seeking civil engineers and with licenses. You have one for me? Awesome, we're talking. But I'm desperately seeking people with employment. I think it's key. So yeah, you can definitely find a great job. Awesome. Yeah.
Final question. We all want to leave here today sounding like we know something about engineering because you've made us so much cooler now. What are the trends coming in the next 20, 30 years that you have seen or are seeing so we can all leave and sound smarter when we talk to people?
Okay, women, we talk about diversity and we need it. We need it in STEM. Specifically, artificial intelligence is one of them. With more men in these roles, there's actually artificial intelligence that doesn't even recognize a woman's voice. You have to be engaged, you have to be in it in order to make those changes. That's why we need representation everywhere. You don't want to be, and I've seen something where there was some discrimination for people depending on their sexual orientation. It was probably not intentionally intended, but that's what it wound up being. So when it comes to virtual reality, AI, Internet of Things, you have to be involved.
Yeah, so if I were, so I would say a couple of different things. One, I mean, clearly, one of the things at MIT, the EECS department's just growing. So clearly electrical engineering and computer science is just a trend, and it's there. And it's not only going to be the thing you need to know because of your job, but it's the thing you need to do everything, right? I mean, having that advantage just raises your bar, I think, in whatever profession you choose. I think, at least in infrastructure, I think that what's very interesting to me is I think the way infrastructure is funded is going to change. And I think that's something we've been puddling around with for a decade, and we still have to continue to figure out how in this country we're going to fund infrastructure. So I think there's a very interesting marriage between technology or understanding technology infrastructure and finance. And the funny thing is, I want to make a note about that. People are very comfortable going into finance, but they're freaked out about the math for engineering. It's not that different, okay? It's pretty much the same. So I think that, recognizing that those opportunities are out there with that background in STEM, you can actually go into finance and some of the other professions that might be considered cooler. I don't necessarily agree. I think are out there. So I would say those are two trends.
And then computer science is going to be ridiculous, so much so that there'll be a lot of jobs and a lot of people will be going into those roles, but there's still going to be a need there. And as you said, electrical engineering, and everybody has to learn some machine language, have to. And I don't care what job you're in, you're going to have to. It's going to be a requirement. And especially if you're talking electrical engineers, you got to do hardware and software. Have to. It's a must.
You heard it here first, folks. Can we give them a round of applause? Amazing. Thank you both so much.